Nothing like a good old bit of Winnipeg Jets hockey over the weekend to make you feel every single emotion possible.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Apologies that we actually had an absence of a show yesterday, was dealing with a family emergency, but we are back. And of course, between now and the previous episode, the Jets have had a couple of games and a little bit of a mixed bag, right? The Central Division is no easy feat to get through. Even the worst teams in the Central still put up a pretty good fight. And I think that just speaks to the fact that, up and down this division, even the poor teams are capable of upsetting your night, right? You look at the Preds, the Blackhawks, the Blues. These teams might be bad, right? But there's still enough to cause you problems. And over the past weekend, we did see Nashville give the Jets fits. And then Winnipeg came back the next game and had a really interesting, a bit of a two-half performance against the Minnesota Wild that, maybe had some room for improvement, but also showcased why the Jets have been a real pain to play against this year. We'll dive into all of that in just a quick moment, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, which you can start this season with a big return on because new customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to learn more and get started. Now, like I said, over the weekend, on Saturday, we had Winnipeg versus Nashville, and that game did not go according to plan. Let's be honest, right? The Jets had come back from, a back-to-back second half, long road trip. I kind of expected the Jets to maybe have some legginess, but I thought, with the Preds offense really struggling recently, this would be a good opportunity to come away with another 2 points. Unfortunately, I think it just caught up to the Jets' fatigue being a real problem in this game. Winnipeg just really didn't have its skating legs for most of the evening. And it wasn't for a lack of effort. This was just one of those games where the Jets were very tired. And it happens, right? Winnipeg is one of those teams that has, quite frankly, really had very few losses this year. After, all is said and done, right now they only have 4 losses on the season, whether in overtime or regulation. All of Winnipeg's losses so far have been in regulation, so it's pretty hard to find fault with anything going on with this team. And every now and then you're just going to have a game where you don't have, 100%, which I don't really think the team needs to have 100% all the time. If you get like 70% every now and then, that's fine. I think in this game, they just had, maybe 30 or 40%. Nashville, you could tell, was rested, and you could tell the Jets, on the other hand, had been playing a lot of hockey. Now, Winnipeg did beat up the Penguins the night before, so obviously, it wasn't really a big deal to lose to the Preds. I think some people have also looked at Nashville and said, if it's the last place team in the Central, there's no excuse not to beat them, even on the second half of a back-to-back. And I feel like that's probably a little unrealistic. Even a Preds team that is only rocking 7 wins right now, including the game against the Jets, they are not an easy team to put down, especially on the road on the second half of a back-to-back. The Preds, whether they're good or bad, are still physical, right? They're a tough team. They've got an astoundingly good goalie. You look at Juuse, and I also, I wonder how Juuse has anything above like a 900 behind this Preds defense. Nashville has not given him a lot of support, and I think if the Jets were rested, this game would have been very different. Winnipeg came out really strong and had a good first 10 minutes, but after that, you could just kind of tell that after Saros made some really big saves, the Jets kind of ran out of steam. And it's one of those things where it's like, you've played a lot of games recently, you're on the second evening of consecutive nights of hockey, not super shocking that you didn't quite have your best. And I feel like sometimes there's a temptation for the fan base to be irritated in a game like this. And I'm not going to sit here and say that, it's great to watch, but I feel like the Jets have really earned the benefit of the doubt. When this team has a bad game, they usually respond not long after that. Even if they lose two in a row, they usually don't let that kind of linger. They've only lost two in a row once this season, which is kind of crazy to say. Most teams have already had at least one or two losing streaks because it kind of happens, right? It's a long season, 82 friggin' games. You're going to drop some results, but the Jets really haven't had that happen. So for me, I'm kind of like, if they lose a game here and there, I don't really care. I just expect them to sort of get back on the horse. They'll rally not long after that. And I think the game against the Minnesota Wild is a really good illustration of why I just have a lot of faith in this team. But all that said, I did see some things in this game that were not great. The top line had a really, really rough night. And, it's kind of showcasing some parts of why I'm still a little bit skeptical of them. Now, they weren't the only group that had a really rough evening. Most of the Jets forwards were just bad, right? So I'm not going to lay all the blame, with the Scheifele unit. But I think Scheifele's wrist injury, which does seem to be holding him back a bit, it's why we're seeing Velarde and even Connor, I think, has taken a faceoff at some point. Everyone else is taking faceoffs for him. And that right wrist injury, if that's what it is, it definitely seems to be impacting his ability to be noticeable. And in other parts, I just feel like he's not really been himself. So this is becoming, a more noticeable problem the last few games. And I think with Scheifele struggling a little bit, I kind of wonder how the Jets are going to balance that, because Mark is really important to everything this team does. And even if he may not be, the McKinnon or a McDavid or something, he is still our number one center. And if he's not really able to keep up because he's dealing with a really significant injury that he can still play through, but it's still impacting his performance, probably something the Jets are going to want to figure out how to load manage, which I don't really know how you do that. With Scheifele not taking faceoffs, that solves one problem. But if he's having other issues, that pain is impacting his ability to really be a force at 5v5 or whatever, not a great situation. So, the top line, I think, really had a rough night. Most of the lines didn't really get much going. I think the fourth line was probably one of the few that I felt was able to sustain the pace. And, at least the Jets didn't get shut out. But, Comrie, I think, put on a really, really good performance. He's probably one of the few players that I thought really showed up and was able to put on a great evening. He made some just jaw-dropping saves and really showed why he, in my mind, has become a very trusted backup for the Jets. A backup position is not necessarily something that I think people give a lot of thought to. Kind of your sacrificial lamb goalie position. But I think for the Jets, it's going to be really important, especially with Hellebuyck, going to start for Team USA here in February. Might be worth getting Comrie a few more games in the back half of the season to try and give Hellebuyck some rest ahead of the playoffs. So rest at Hellebuyck might be good enough to get the Jets into some really good territory deeper in the postseason. And I can't believe I'm already talking about the playoffs and we're only 22 games through the year, but the Jets are kind of at that point. I mean, they're already firmly in a playoff spot. They are extremely unlikely. In fact, it's almost impossible in my mind for them to fall out of the postseason picture at this point because they've just been so good. And, with Hellebuyck rocking one of the craziest save percentages in the whole league, I don't think it would be the worst idea to give your backup, who's got a 9-10 after this game, some extra work. He's almost 10 points above league average right now. That is pretty monstrous for your number two. And a guy who I think is really showing that you can trust him with quite a few games. Unfortunately, the Jets haven't really given him a lot of run support, which sucks because, in his games, he's generally been quite impressive. But, Comrie is Comrie. He understands the game. He knows his role, and I think he's really taken to it. And, it's nice to see him doing well, even in the limited action that he gets. But obviously, this Preds game, kind of a write-off. What was really going to be an interesting test was how the Jets would not only respond to this, but also the long-term injury to Dylan Samberg. He blocked a Stamkos shot early in the game, broke his foot. Winnipeg was playing down a man, and not only were they playing down a Samberg, but he's their best overall defender, right? Morrissey, of course, is your best, attacking-minded blue liner, having a little bit of trouble with DeMello this year. But Samberg, if you're looking for your stabilizing force, he was probably the guy that I thought the Jets really couldn't live without and now he's done for at least 4 to 6 weeks, maybe a little more. We'll have to see. Broken foot is never an easy thing to deal with. So it was going to be a big test coming into this Wild game because Minnesota plays a very fast, very physical game. A lot faster than I was expecting. I did not really think that they were going to come out of the gates swinging the way that they did in last night's game. But we'll chat about that and how the Jets handled it in just a brief moment. Before we go too much further, though, did want to shout out our friends and partners at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million subscribers and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports available to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. If you're wondering why you should make PrizePicks your first choice, they offer great options and always put their members first, including fast withdrawals that are safe and secure. And when your picks hit, you can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. They even offer Venmo for quick deposits and withdrawals into your account. And if you have an injury of some sort, no worries. They come with an injury insurance so that your lineup will still stay active, and they invented the flex play, which means that even if your picks aren't perfect, you can still win big. You can win 100 times your cash if you have as little as 4 correct picks. And we're available in over 30 states, so it's great for those of you in the U.S. who are obviously dealing with some gambling restrictions. This is a fantastic way to get in on the action. And right now, you can sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's just guaranteed. And of course, right now, obviously, the Jets have a big game coming up tomorrow against the LA Kings. I would say, 1.5, maybe even over 2 points for the top line. I think that they're going to have a big response after a sort of not great past couple of games. But of course, Morrissey, probably a safe bet. If Hellebuyck gets the start, you have to imagine that maybe under 3 goals conceded probably feels pretty good right now, especially with the Kings getting embarrassed by the Sharks. But of course, the only way that you can do that is to download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about, obviously a big response game from the Jets after the maybe disappointing, but perhaps not super, super shocking result against the Nashville Predators. Tough road game, back-to-back nights. A loss was probably due against a Preds team that was frankly really desperate to not be embarrassed. They have been awful to start this year, but still a very tough team. And, the Wild game promised to have an even tougher opponent. Minnesota is second in the division, and based on what I saw in this game, I kind of understand why. They have good goaltending in Gustafsson, and then this team just plays with a lot more speed than I was expecting. The Wild were buzzing, especially for, I would say, the first 30 to 35 minutes. They were definitely outskating the Jets. They were out-creating Winnipeg, and it was a very fast-paced game, which is not how Minnesota usually plays. I'm used to a very heavy forechecking team, one that's not really that impressive, moving about and really creating offense. This has not usually been their forte, but this year it seems like there's more dynamism to the team. They created lots of good opportunities, and Hellebuyck really stood on his head to give the Jets time to get into this game. And it did take a fair bit for Winnipeg to finally start to wake up. The first period was really rough for the Jets. They were getting outshot by a pretty fair margin. Jake Middleton scored first off of a bit of a juicy rebound, and you thought, oh dear, this could get bad quickly if the Jets aren't able to stabilize. But Alex Iafallo responded not long after that. A great fourth line shift. It's been nice to see the fourth line finally get rewarded for a big play. Kupari makes a forced play in the corner. Sauces a nice little pass to Iafallo, and he came out with a great backhand. And then in the second period, Niederreiter, having played for the Wild, got a little bit of revenge against them, potting his 9th goal of the season. And it was helped by a great assist from Pionk, who really busted his butt after struggling on the initial play. He came all the way back to join the rush and ended up giving Niederreiter a little bit of a helping hand. So good to see him. His effort continues to be really impressive. And then at that point, Winnipeg seemingly turned the game a little bit on its head, right? The Wild had really pressured, had really driven, back and forth and really made it a track meet. And then the Jets started to get control of the game and slow things down. Iafallo added yet another goal, his second goal of the game on the power play. And finally, at the end, Lowry finished it off, empty netter. And like that, the Jets have won, 6 or 7 straight against Minnesota. So really impressive, especially the second half of this game. Winnipeg really started to limit Minnesota's transition, and they slowed the game down. And I know somebody disagreed with me against the Panthers game where Winnipeg won, but I think that this game is a really good illustration in 60 minutes of why I continue to say that for the Jets, slowing the game down is how you win, right? Shut down that transition, clog up the neutral zone, make it very hard for opponents to gain your blue line, and help Hellebuyck out a little bit because he was, quite frankly, the best player on the ice. He put on an absolutely astounding show. There were probably 5 or 6 jaw-dropping saves. I probably yelled out at least a couple of times on some of the opportunities he was able to shut down. Just an incredible night for him. 43 saves, which is just mind-boggling. It moves him back to a .929 save percentage on the season, 15 wins, first goalie to that this year, and just a really, really impressive performance. In terms of some broader takeaways, the top line again had a really rough evening. This is one of those scenarios where I continue to express a little bit of skepticism about what you do with that line. Obviously, the top line is trying to get things together, and they've had some really good games this year. But I think in matchups where they're facing fast teams, this is where I think that they really struggle. Those quick counter transition teams just give them a lot of trouble. And until the Jets can slow the pace of the game down, the top line really isn't as much of a factor. The Nemesnikov line I also thought was fairly modest. I didn't really see a lot out of them. Perfetti, is maybe dealing with a slight scoring drought recently. Ehlers also, at 5v5 hasn't been, nailing it in the back of the net as much. And I think it's partly a product of the fact that this line doesn't really work with Nemesnikov. Vlad is trying to keep up as much as he can, and he's still scoring a fair few points. But I think it's more a product of his line mates doing a lot of the heavy lifting and him just being around the goal crease. His ability to create has definitely slowed down a bit. And I think the Jets are probably going to need to think about bringing in a center of some sort. I don't know what that looks like yet. I continue to really be a big fan of like a Brock Nelson type because internally, I just don't think the Jets have someone like that. Even Brad Lambert, he hasn't exactly been ripping it up with the Moose, and I think 2C would be much too quick to ask of him right now. So the Jets might need to make a trade at some point, but we'll just have to be patient and see what they do with that. Maybe Nemesnikov is just dealing with an injury or something, but my general takeaway is he's definitely having a rough one. DeMello has also really had a rough season, and again, it just continues to look bad. He got turnstiled on this one opportunity. I forget who even undressed him, but he very nearly, he actually did give up a really dangerous breakaway and just got caught really flat-footed. Hellebuyck bailed him out, but it continues to be a real problem where the top pairing is just not able to play like your top D pairing. Typically Samberg and Pionk are going to be your breadwinners right now, and Samberg's now injured for like a month and a half. So it's a bit of a dicey situation, but with all of the losses, the big loss in Samberg, Heinola finally came back. And for a debut after not having played in the NHL for like 2 years now, I thought he put in a pretty solid shift. The first period or so was not good. He definitely showed rust and was getting beat positionally. But then over time, he started to tie up more sticks. He made some good, defensive zone exits and passes and just made, for what I would say was probably one of the more stable D pairings. Miller, Heinola, made some clean zone exits. They got the puck up the ice. I didn't really see a lot of Heinola's typical, flashy puck carrying inside the offensive zone, but I think for the first game back, really, he's only played 2 games of pro hockey since spring, so I really wouldn't expect a lot, but I thought he actually acclimated to the game pretty quickly, especially considering how much Minnesota was running things for the first 30 or so minutes. So overall, I just hope that he keeps it up. It's nice to see him playing at least competently because, the Jets defense right now has a lot of gaps. Fleury and Pionk are playing together, which you probably know that was the worst pairing on the night. Fleury's trying his best. Pionk's trying his best. Just not going to work out that well. So going to have to hope that Heinola is able to really ramp up quickly. I wouldn't be shocked if Arnie tries Heinola Pionk at some point once Villy is finally ready to start getting more shifts, especially with Samberg out. Heinola Pionk has had some runway in the past, and the last time that they tried it a couple years ago, it did look pretty good. Obviously, times have changed a lot, almost 2 full calendar years. But hey, maybe something might shake out and we see this pairing actually do well. Would be fantastic to kind of have, somebody who can at least be a stabilizing force for Neil and let him do what Pionk really does best, which is attacking below the goal line, really being a fourth winger, all that kind of stuff. Because with Fleury, he can't do that as much, and it forces him to defend more, which is probably not what you want. So big win on the road for the Jets. This has really been one of the most brutal stretches for the Jets over the past couple of weeks. And finally, it does, seem like we're in the last couple of games on the road here before at least a few more home outings. The next couple of games are going to be pretty tough for the Jets. And then finally, starting next week, they're going to have a couple of opportunities to play back at Canada Life Center. But again, it just seems like the NHL schedule makers really wanted to give the Jets the finger, like 3 more road games, you get a home game, then 2 more road games, and then a home game. I just don't really understand why they've done this to the Jets. Really busy road schedule. This is one of the most grueling trips, but it's almost at the end, and I think the Jets have generally handled things about as well as you could possibly ask. Again, brutal schedule, but given the circumstances, I think the Jets have done about as much as you could possibly ask of them. They just have to hold out a little bit longer before the end of the month. But I did want to talk a little bit about Samberg and how Heinola might be able to help replace his impact, because quite frankly, Samberg was one of the few guys that I thought would be irreplaceable, but now we're going to have to somehow. So we'll chat about that in just a quick moment. But before we go any further, I want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Obviously, for me as a Ravens fan, Ravens-Chargers yesterday, huge game, very controversial calls in a lot of ways. The officiating was a little chaotic, but thankfully Baltimore somehow prevailed. Maybe you're a fan of a different team, though, like the Vikes. Your defense with Darnold looks to be doing pretty well. Perhaps you are a Jets fan, and if you are, I'm very sorry. Not been a great season, but you know what? Maybe you're watching one of these games, you're getting a hunch in the middle, and you want to check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. Well, you can do that with FanDuel, where you're placing your bets. The same page offers you all of the most up-to-date, latest information on the games you're watching, and helps you make the most informed bets possible. All you have to do to get started is visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's all at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts on tonight's episode, as we're just chatting a little bit about the loss of Dylan Samberg and how that's going to make things a little bit challenging for the Jets, and how Winnipeg can try and, find a replacement, right? I have to be honest, I don't think that there is a replacement for Samberg, because he is a rock at even strength and on the PK, and really this year has stepped up defensively in a way that no one else in our blue line is really capable of replacing. I think that that's just flat out the truth. He is the anchor that really lets Pionk be this really menacing attacking presence inside the offensive zone. Neil's pressure and wing play and width play has really been a result of Samberg being the guy who can track back quickly and cover for them. It lets Neil really fly up the ice, and now you have to figure out how to replace that. Samberg, is a big, strong defender with good puck-moving ability, strong skater. Sure, he does have a fair few turnovers and mistakes because he's being asked to do more, but in terms of total defensive impact, he has been our top shutdown guy. So Winnipeg doesn't really have that now. What they do have, though, is the ability to maybe try and rebalance the pairings a bit so that they could get something more out of what they've got on hand, which is really a mixture of depth defensemen and, an interesting prospect in Heinola, who's probably at this point a little older than a prospect, and Morrissey. With all that in mind, I think at some point you have to figure out what to do with Morrissey and DeMello, because that pairing as is generally struggling in most of these games. And it really comes down to DeMello. Like, Morrissey hasn't been perfect either, but DeMello has probably not made things all that great, especially on the defensive side of things, right? So that's problem number one. Second pairing right now is Fleury Pionk. You probably don't want to ride with that too long. Fleury has stepped in and done about as much as you could ask a guy who's basically been a seventh defender the past couple of seasons, but asking more than that probably is a little too much. Based on how Arniel has kind of talked about Heinola, though, I think the plan is to get him up to speed, feed him some NHL reps, and let him move into that second pairing spot alongside Pionk over the next couple of weeks. He's only got to hold out for like a month and a half before the Jets can basically reset their defense with Samberg coming back. But even then, Samberg's still going to be rusty, and broken feet, skating and trying to get your feet back in shape, get your skating legs back. It's going to take some time for him to ramp up again. So Heinola might be asked to do this a little more, and I think that's kind of where Heinola's ability to move the puck cleanly, to make some good breakout passes, and try and use better positioning and stick work than just being a purely physical player is going to be helpful. Now, what is interesting is that he's often talked about as being really undersized. He's actually the same height as Morrissey, and he's really not that afraid to grind in the corners. He will at times get bodied off by bigger players, but I think the biggest thing with him is that he's very active and he'll constantly look to get the puck out of the zone, right? That's his big thing. Make stretch passes, hit those breakouts, and try and keep the play away from his own end. First game, obviously a little bit of a mixed bag because he hasn't played in quite some time, at least at this level of hockey. And you will expect him to have some bumps and bruises over the next few weeks as he gets up to speed. But I think, with his adaptation ability, with how, he's really been motivated to kind of fight back and, get back into the lineup, this is really his chance to run with it. And so far, first game, I thought that he did about as much as you could ask. If he really earns the trust of the coaching staff, I don't think it'll be long before he moves on to that second pairing. They might even try it tomorrow against the Kings, but we'll just have to be patient and see what he does. I think Heinola is the closest you're going to have to somebody who can help calm Pionk and let him be, kneel up the ice, because we don't really have anyone else who's capable of tracking back effectively, who can sort of cleanly pass the puck, and who can at least let Pionk be the sort of more aggressive pressure guy. Because Heinola also has that ability to be a really creative puck handler at the blue line, and maybe having them both together will allow the Jets to have more offensive success with some of these skill lines that have maybe been struggling a little bit. So there's a lot of interesting ways to kind of skin the cat, so to speak. And I think the Jets have some legit chances to maybe even get Dylan Coughlin back into the lineup at some point. Would be interesting to see if maybe he can do something effectively here. But really, it's going to be a lot of success by committee. That's how the Jets have traditionally been this season, and now they're facing one of their biggest losses to the roster so far. A lot of other teams have already had to weather serious injuries, so it was going to come for the Jets at some point. But if you really want to find out what this team is made of, there is no better time than right now. And so far, I think that they've answered the bell in the best way that they can. Shutting down the Wild in the second half was a big thing. Now they're going to get to go to LA and take on a Kings team that, quite frankly, got embarrassed last night in the Sharks game. So come away with 2 more points. Then, you get American Thanksgiving off in a firm playoff spot. And by the end of the week, the Jets could have up to 38 or 40 standings points. That is truly incredible. To have that ability already at this point in the season is remarkable. I think it's worth repeating every single time. And you know what? As long as it keeps, holding on, it's just going to be one of the most fun seasons in recent memory. So let's just hope that the Jets can keep the good vibes rolling and take care of business tomorrow. But of course, we'll talk about that game later this week, and the Knights game, of course, later as well, probably early next week. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with coverage ahead of LA. Hopefully, we get to talk about a win later in the week. But like I said, that's all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.